Hey, what's up, everybody? I just wanted to please ask everybody sign up to my Patreon, patreon.com, MikeGrib8, just like my Twitter at. It really helps support the podcast, and yeah, I'm really need the help from you guys. I really appreciate everybody who has signed up so far. So thank you so much. So we can keep doing this work on improving scouting and just learning and spreading knowledge about basketball scouting. Really appreciate all the listeners, and if you can't, it's understandable. But if you could, please help me out on Patreon, patreon.com at MikeGrib8. Thank you so much.
Me and Mike did like a pod last week, and we kind of found that a lot of like the top guys, like even like or for wings and center, it's kind of obvious, but even like guys like Jokic, who doesn't traditionally seem like the athletic guy, or maybe Harden, like these guys are all these star players are outlierishly strong.
Mm,
And
yep.
we've kind of alluded to this too, like from the basketball or from the basketball football standpoint, where these guys are very strong, they're very good run jump athletes, and then that translates well. So do you think that strength may be an indicator for perhaps like star potential, or how do you value strength, maybe from a recruiting standpoint or just scouting?
Um, I don't know that it necessarily translates to star potential. But I think it definitely translates to the potential to get to that next level. I think it's very hard, especially at the high school level, if you don't have any level of strength to get to, especially like if you're talking about getting to the high major levels and whatnot. I think the only way that you can really make it at that, you have to be extremely skilled. Like, you know what I mean? You have to be, you know, an outlier potentially where you're a 6'8" point guard that's extremely skilled, but maybe is super skinny and not strong because you can play, in other spaces and do things that guys can't do. Um, but that strength translates, like you said, once you get to the highest level, even the next level, even once you get to college, there's guys that have spent that time in the weight room and they already have all the skill and whatnot. But now what's going to separate them is the physicality, because they're going to be able to bump you and take bumps that you may not be able to take. You bring up somebody like James Harden, who traditionally isn't looked at as one of the best, athletes or one of the most in shape guys. But like you said, these guys are strong as hell, to be honest with you. Like, they're putting a lot of time and energy into their bodies and being strong, even if they don't necessarily look the part. Um, and that matters because they can take bumps around the rim. James Harden, obviously one of the best finishers that you'll see in the NBA. Jokic uses his strength to his advantage every time he's on the floor, whether it's in the high post, the low post, it doesn't really matter. If he gets you on the dribble, one of the quickest things that he's going to do is flip that hip and put you on his backside, and he's going to make it a power on power game. And 9 times out of 10, he's going to win that game if he wants to. Um, so I don't know if that's just because of the fact that they are stars, because you obviously have guys like the Steven Adams of the world and Rudy Gobert's that are also extremely strong that may not necessarily be considered star players. But it definitely has an effect, in my opinion, on your ability to elevate to the levels above, just like high school basketball. If you want to play, at the collegiate level, strength is going to be huge. And that's why, these schools spend so much money and their resources into having facilities that are big on, strength and conditioning and nutrition and things like that, because they know that that's one of those separators, that you have to have in order to really, be successful.
You said it's like harder to improve your finishing if you aren't like already at like a requisite level of strength.
Mm, I would say yes to an extent. And the reason I say yes is the type of finishing. You obviously got guys that can be very finesse finishers, more so over the top. But you've got guys even like Isaiah Thomas, who's one of the most undersized guards that you'll find, that is fearless when it comes to getting to the rim and finishing against much bigger players, because he has the strength to be able to jump into them, take the contact, and still finish at the rim consistently. And you'll see several of those guys. And so at some point, we had a college coach, for example, that was in the gym not too long ago talking to one of our guys. And he was like, you're elite level athlete or whatever the case may be. But, right now at the high school level, a lot of guys aren't going to be in the way when you go to jump. You're going to finish against air a lot of times, or, a kind of weak closeout or contest, because, a lot of these guys, one, aren't willing to get dunked on, two, they're not trained to be able to contest shots properly without fouling, things like that. But as you continue to elevate levels, that's not going to be the case. There's going to be somebody there. There's going to be help side rotation that's going to be there, to wall up and meet you at the rim. And you have to be strong enough to, be a 6'5" shooting guard that meets a 6'11" center at the rim and takes the contact and can finish, with touch around the rim. So that strength comes into play in that situation for sure. When it comes to development, you have to be able to take those bumps, because if you don't have the strength to go in there and take a bump like that, you're going to end up on your backside a lot of times when when that guy walls up, and you're not going to get a call for it because he's trained at that point how to do it without fouling you. So you've got to be able to match, strength with strength as much as possible there to be able to improve to, the elite levels of finishing.
But I'm thinking of a guy like Terquavion Smith, right? Like he was like one of the worst finishers in all college basketball last year. And he's very skinny. He's not that short, but he's like 6'4", I think. So do you think it would be harder for him to improve his finishing without that like level of improving maybe his frame or his strength? Or like how would you go about diagnosing and actually like implementing changes to improve his finishing?
I think he would have to improve his size, and I think that's one of those things that I would assume when he's going through draft workouts and things like that. That's probably one of those checkbox things. Is like, you got to put on some size, like you've got to get bigger, without losing the shiftiness and things of that nature. So I think right now, a lot of times he's limited to trying to finish over the top of guys because of the fact that if he goes in there, he's not going to be able to bang with those guys and finish. If you do, you have to get really crafty if you're avoiding contact. You know what I mean? If you don't have that strength, there's guys like, the Kyries of the world. He can finish really well without having to take those bumps because of how crafty he is. You can see little things that he does, like when Kyrie gets to the rim, he has the ability to play off too, but also torque his body in a way that can avoid contact and put him in the ball closer to the backboard to protect him, to make sure that he has the opportunity to finish those layups without contact. So, you can do it for sure, but it's definitely harder, I think, to have to learn how to torque and tweak yourself to avoid contact than to be able to show that you can play through contact. Because what I'm thinking of as a coach, if I know that this guy can play through contact, then I also know that my big man is now more susceptible to getting fouls called, and that guy is going to go put himself into the chest of my big more often, which a lot of times naturally can lead to foul calls because their body folds down, they call a foul on it, whatever. So that big may now have to back off a little bit because, damn, he's physical. Like, I can't play with him the same way. And that leads to more actual, opportunities that are taken advantage of without as strong of a contest. So, part of that is huge too. Like, being able to have that strength actually makes you harder to guard because you make yourself more versatile as the ways that you can finish. Versus me being able to scout you and say, well, he's too small, he's not going to come in here, and if he does, just wall up on him, and he's not going to be able to finish well because he can't take the bump.
How about a guy like Trae Young? Because I don't think he would be considered like traditionally strong, but obviously he's great at drawing fouls, especially in the paint.
Right. Elite player when it comes to his craftiness. You know, again, I don't think he, like you say, not super strong, but he's so crafty with the basketball, and he's so quick and quick twitch that, you know, he's got one of the best hesitation moves that you'll see in the NBA. And I think that leads to a lot of the reasons that he's able to get fouled, is because he's so versatile with what the ways that he can score, that he always keeps you off balance, right? Like, you don't know if he's going to lay the ball up, float the ball, shoot the ball. Like, you don't know what you're getting from the guy. And just when he looks up to make you think that he's about to float it, he puts it back down and goes underneath you for a layup, and you end up swiping down at him, get a foul and one. So I think that versatility of his craftiness makes him so hard to guard, which leads to him, you know, getting a lot of those opportunities at the free throw line, because you just don't know what you're going to get from him. Like, you got to hope that he's off most nights.
So do you think that like finishing craft, that like craftiness at the rim is similar within Trey and Kyrie, or do you think they do it like a little different ways?
I think there's elements of it that are similar, but I do think that they do it differently as well. I think Kyrie is more apt to, you know, different types of layups. He's got a great ability to control the ball off the glass with different types of English and things like that put him in positions to be able to lay the ball up in different ways. I think Trey uses more of his over the top touch when it comes to that. I think he does a lot more floaters or high layups and things like that. I also think Kyrie has gotten into a mode where, and whether it's because of training with, you know, with Kobe Bryant or watching, you know, studying him, whatever, he can play out of that mid post a lot better as well, right? Like, back to the basket where he's posting up a guard that's around the same size or smaller. Whereas Trey or a guy like Steph Curry or someone, when they get into that mid-range area, a lot of times they're going to one hand float it, and just kind of keep it moving. So there's definitely differences between the two from what I've seen as far as how they finish around the rim and their different abilities to do it. I think it's always just kind of cool to see how you can be so elite at the same thing, just in different ways, as far as how they do it.
Yeah, I think that like the footwork in the mid post is like for Kyrie, and even like Jalen Brunson, right? Like I forget what it's called, like the inverted offense that like Jay Wright ran with Jalen Brunson, where he was posting up at like
Right.
6'1". So like that development, even though he's small, he's not particularly quick or doesn't have the greatest like verticality, he's still
Right.
able to be like an efficient finisher just because by virtue of that like those reps as like playing as a post-up man despite being 6'1". So I think that like there is like different levels of craft. Like even you can have that mid-post footwork, the post-ups type stuff at like that's such a diminutive height, or you can be like Trey, like that float, or Curry, that like floater heavy, that like very touch dependent like finishing. So I think that's
Right.
a good distinction. But which one do you think is more manageable? Like which one's more feasible to develop? Is it which type of craft for like these smaller guards?
Man, I would probably say the over the top, like floater type touch is probably more feasible. And I think that kind of goes back to is like what we were talking about earlier, which is when, you know, it's more common as far as what you've been learning your entire life at that position. Whereas most of these guards are not used to having to post up, or what post, you know, footwork feels like, and how to be crafty in those spaces. That's just not something that they traditionally are learning. Whereas having touch, or, you know, being able to float the ball could be as similar as floating an alley-oop. You know what I mean? You're just using a different target at that point. So I think that one's more feasible. I think that I think that having the mid post game is more versatile though. Like, if you have that in your arsenal, I mean, that's a game changer. You're really like extremely, you know, threatening as an offensive player if you can, you know, especially in the NBA with as much as they switch, right? Like, if you can get into the low post against some a guard that's got, you know, you've got a mismatch with, and treat him like a big man, you know, and just back him down and get to your different spots and finish over the top, then that makes you extremely versatile, even though that's not as I guess, analytically efficient of a shot. You know what I mean? But if you can do it at a high level, then kind of analytics kind of go out the window, so to speak, when you've got it at the level that somebody like a Kyrie has it at.
Yeah, I think like even worst case, like if you're like 6'2" going up against like a 6'11" guy, that kind of just necessitate that means that there's a mismatch somewhere else on the floor where like you got like a center, like, especially if you have like a center who can like spot up or like at a decent level, like
Right.
if you have that mismatch on the other side of the floor, you can just even utilize your threat of that post up at such a short height to like pick up
Absolutely.
that like the advantage elsewhere. So I think that's like obviously the floater part is a little easier, more feasible. I think with
Right.
what you said. Even that is, I think that's difficult. Like Trey and Curry, they have like maybe the two best touch specifically like in the entire league. So that versus like the mid post, but yeah, I think it's difficult. It's very difficult to expect like small guards to make those like craft developments. But
Right.
if a guard does have that level of that craft around the rim, that might even be a level of like star indicators where even a guy like Jalen Brunson, he wasn't considered a star even 2 years ago, but now he's
Right.
making hundreds of $1 million as
Yeah.
the so
Definitely. I think him and, Drew Holiday is another good example. I think they run an inverted offense similar to that, where they put him in the dunk spots a lot when Giannis is running the one. And that versatility is, along with his defensive abilities and things, those things make him really, I think one of the more underrated point guards in the league, or guards, so to speak, in the league. His ability to have that versatility inside and out is huge.
So do you see this versatility at like a lower level, like in high school? Like, do you think I am not familiar with Jalen Brunson's high school career at all, but would you think that he was doing that stuff in high school as well? Or are there indicators that he has that ability to post? Because I don't think most players can do that. So
Right. I don't know, to be real. I'm not sure too much about his background, and if it's something that he did prior to that, or if he did it once he got there with Jay Wright, or what the situation may be. I know from from what I see every day, we've got one kid in particular, Silas Demery Jr., who's actually committed to USC. He'll be there next fall. He's an elite guard when it comes to posting up. Like, he's bigger at the point guard spot, 6'4", 6'5". He's very strong. He's one of those football players that turned into an elite basketball player, extremely physical kid. And man, he's a mismatch nightmare when he gets the ball in the short corner, or on a low block against the point guard, because he can get to a little bit of anything that he wants to. He can back them down because he's got the size advantage, but he's also got the mid-range shot and the footwork to turn around and pull up and play a face-up game. And then to your point as well, he can pass the ball out of the post. So it's a situation like with him, he can do those things because of, his trainer. Anthony Simmons has trained him on things like that, right? Like, to this point, like, so he works on those things in the off season. And then when it comes to our season, we put him in game situations where we find, actions and sets that purposefully get him into those situations. So now when he gets to the next level, Andy Enfield may want to do something similar with him at USC. And that translates already because he's seen it. He's done it several times over. So I know that's just an example of what I've seen with him, but I would say that the vast majority of guards that come in the door, from what I've seen, don't have a back to the basket post or mid post type game. They spend a lot of their time on the perimeter. But I do think a lot of that has to do with who they're training with and what they're training on in their downtime. A lot of these guys aren't training, these guys to do those things anymore because they look at it as something that's not as important anymore. You know what I mean? The days of the Kobe's of the world, playing out of the mid post consistently, or even guys like Carmelo, who's elite in that mid post area, those days aren't as prevalent anymore, because analytics have told guys that the mid range shot is not as important. So what they train on, is what usually translates. So I think it's less prevalent at this point, but there's definitely guys out there that are still training on it and that are looking at it as an advantage at the high school level, and that can potentially translate into the next levels as well.
Maybe like these like players who are so strong and have great footwork in this mid post, maybe Jalen Brunson or Harden, and when you combine that with their like incredible pull up shooting, like their touch, that's
Right.
just a crazy combination where
So that's one of those things, like you were saying, like star indicators. When you can do all of those things, have that type of versatility, you put yourself in the best position to have that star power, so to speak, because you could become such a weapon that you can get to your spots and get your shots in so many different ways that it just puts you at an offensive advantage.
and on top of that, they're both like incredible passers and
Right.
just
Right.
game so much for them. So
Yeah.
and so going back to like the shooting and the handle development. So
Yep.
for these guys who are like outlier handle development or outlier shooting development, so what are the best indicators of outlier handle development from what you've seen? The guys who have these crazy handle, not linear, maybe like it's somewhat unexpected. Like, are there any common trends in their game? Maybe they're more explosive, or you said like the smaller hands thing. Maybe that's part of it. What are these trends in handle development?
I think it's something that necessarily can't be taught, but it's like quick twitch explosiveness. So where you've got some guys that are just explosive that can be great leapers or whatever. Maybe they're 2-foot jumpers that can just really jump out of the gym. But you've got other guys whose athleticism is more about the twitch, like how quickly they can do certain things or how quickly they can react to certain movements. Some of the more elite guys that you've probably been able to see are, guys like Jamal Crawford. Like, he obviously is super quick twitch type of guy that has an elite level handle. He's one of those guys that could do, the and one type moves in a real NBA setting and pull it off consistently. Kyrie is another one of those guys. He's extremely quick, and he can change paces better than almost anybody that you'll watch handle the basketball. Even down to the high school level, Robert Dillingham has one of the most quick twitch handles that you'll ever see, and it makes him extremely hard to guard, because you really, when you react to him, he reacts to you just as quick, if not quicker, and makes that next move. So it's very hard to stay in front of. I think those guys end up having the best ability to become elite level handlers, because once they learn to control the ball itself, they pair that with their quick twitch ability, and it just kind of is like a match made in heaven. Yes, I can go between my legs and do this, that, and the next, but I can do it so much quicker than you can move defensively that now I become elite because you can't react faster than I can react, so to speak.
Oh, so you're like diagnosing what they're doing, and then you're making the decision making just so much faster than them. And
right. You can just move so much quicker than that person in front of you when it comes to, what you're doing. I can step back to an example of a kid that we have on our team, Riquise Passmore. One of the biggest things that we've been working on with him is his left hand, his offhand development. And, we've had a coach come in there and it's like, yeah, when he gets the left hand, it's just going to be, different. It's going to be elite. But he said the thing is, he's so quick with his right hand and the moves that he has with it that you still can't stop it. And I think it's just that maybe it's like a brain signal type thing or just whatever. As a defender, you're guessing. You're always in a guessing game. You don't know where that guy with the ball is going. And the quicker that person can make those moves, the harder it is for you to guess. So in a kid like Riquise's case, right, if he shows me an in and out move and does it extremely fast, naturally that first motion that he makes, I'm going to want to jump to that gap to stop him from potentially crossing over and going to the left. But when he just comes back to the right that quickly, there's nothing I can do to get there. You know, I really have to sell out to his right hand and just hope that he goes left at that point. You know what I mean? And so I think those, you know, those guys have that ability because of how quick they are. I mean, Dillingham, for example, you know, he's got certain moves that he loves to go to. You know, if he drives the baseline, he's usually going to spin back around, you know, little things like that that you can scout. But it's like, I can scout it 100 times, but when I get out there and he's doing it and I see him go a certain way, my brain is still telling me, like, I got to stop him from going that way. And as soon as I stop him from going that way, he goes back the other way. And it's just like, what do you do with it? You know what I mean? So you see it at the even the highest levels. You know, these guys are extremely crafty, extremely quick twitch. But I do think that quick twitch ability that you see from somebody like Kyrie is, you know, it makes it look like razzle dazzle flashy, but it's really just like a God-given ability that makes him extremely hard to stay in front of, given the fact that he has the handle on top of it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And my final question is, it's similar, but just for shooting, like guys who make outlier shooting jumps, are there any trends in these type of players? Are there certain like traits with like maybe they have skills that seemingly intersect that may like help them make that like shooting jump that may be outside of expectations?
I don't know how to necessarily word what it is that elite shooters have, but it's an ability to repeat the same thing consistently without almost, I don't want to say getting bored, but you know, they have this ability to lock in, whether it's to the footwork of the jump shot, to the upper body mechanics, without trying to do anything flashy or special, right? Like, to me, if you think about it, the vast majority of your highest level shooters are guys that are super mechanically sound every time they shoot the ball. JJ Redick, Mike Miller, Klay Thompson, their shot looks exactly the same every single time. They don't do anything flashy. They don't do anything different. It's just so fundamental and mechanically sound every time. You know, I think there's something to be said for that. I don't know what you call that necessarily. But, you know, I think there's also a lot of guys that feel like they have to change things. They have to be more crafty, or they have to, fade away or do this, that, and the next. Whereas those guys, they really learn how to do specific things really well. And if they don't have what they want in that situation, then they move the ball and they get to the next opportunity. So I don't know. I don't know what you call that. Like, maybe just their decision-making process, their dedication, they're just really locked in. But those guys, you know, the Ray Allens of the world and whatnot, like they have an uncanny ability to lock into doing the exact same thing over and over and over again. Focus probably is the best word. Like they have a different level of focus than a lot of guys have when it comes to just ability in general.
Yeah, I think there's like a mental aspect, like the ability to just consistently repeat it. That's not even like that discipline isn't even just like basketball related. Like I think
Right.
probably like apply that to outside of basketball, but like more in tune to just like basketball. I think there is maybe like an element of overthinking when you're shooting. Like I think when I watch Russell Westbrook, I feel like he's kind of like overthinking his movements a little bit, where like every single time he's thinking about everything so much where it just kind of like messes up his pattern a little bit. I don't know if there's like a biomechanical term, or if there's a term where like you're so used to it that it's so rhythmic that you don't even think about it. But
Right. I agree. I don't know. Like you said, I don't know if there's any terminology for it. But there's definitely something to be said for it. I mean, if you can come off of a pin down screen the exact same way every single time, turn your body the exact same way every single time, and release the ball the same way, there's something to just be said for, like you said, the discipline, the focus that you have to be able to repeat that action at the highest level that many times, to the point where you're getting paid, to do it at some point. And there's no denying that, because if that wasn't the case, then everybody would be able to do it. You know what I mean? And to have that ability to miss a shot, but then go back and trust that you did the mechanical things the right way, or that you're going to do them the right way the next time, and the next one's going to go in.
Do you think like these players who are super quick, like not quick twitch athleticism and like decision making, but more like your Russell Westbrooks or Dennis Smith Jr.'s, these guys all have very hitchy jump shots. Where I think for both of them, whenever I watch them, I think that they're overthinking it too much. Do you
Right.
think there's that ability to like have that like biomechanical discipline almost? Do you think that it may be related to that? Is that just two extreme cases? Do you have any experience with that? Or
I think there's something to be said for them relying solely on their athleticism for so long that it's hard for them to get out of the habits of what they've been doing from a jump shooting perspective for so long. As you can see with those two examples, for example, they've both been putting a lot of work in to try to develop and change their jump shot. But it kind of goes back to what you were asking before, like how late is too late? And you may be too late at this point to train them into doing new tricks, because like you said, they may not be locked in enough to be able to consistently make that change every single game going forward after they've been doing it for 20 years. Because of the fact that they didn't have to. A guy like Russell Westbrook could be extremely explosive for the first 5-10 years of his career and not have to think about, well, what's going to happen when this explosiveness slows down a little bit. You know what I mean? So I think that in those cases, it's a situation where they may have gotten started too late on trying to develop or change some of these things. And now that pressure is on, especially with a guy like Westbrook, like you can't just do what you used to do anymore. So that pressure is on you to develop the jump shot. It may be too late, like to really understand that. Whereas a guy like Kobe Bryant, when he was playing, he was extremely athletic, but he worked on learning post ups and different things that translated to, when he got older and wasn't explosive playing above the rim and things like that. So his game was able to change with the times. And I think LeBron has even done the same thing, right? He could primarily depend on his athleticism and size, and skill for a long time. He's gotten significantly better as a jump shooter, but it's still not his primary thing. But what makes him still so lethal is that he's turned himself into an elite floor general at that size, I think. So, you kind of have to, for those quick twitch guys or those super athletic guys like that, you have to think ahead to what does it look like going forward? You know what I mean? I think you see a lot of those guys become 3-and-D guys as they get older, right? They learn how to. Vince Carter, he turned himself from being the most explosive athlete in the NBA to being a jump shooter that just goes play defense and spots up in the corners on offense and still plays his role at a high level. So those are things that you definitely have to be working on, I think, over the course of time, just with that expectation in mind that it's going to change at some point as far as the athleticism goes.
Yeah, it makes sense. If you don't like work on that craft throughout your career, and then you're like, however old Westbrook is, like 33, like obviously when you start trying to do the jump shooting in practice, it's not going to end well.
Right.
The scouting thing started in August 2017. I took a class with a guy named Ilan Vinokurov, who is a scout. He ran his own scouting service for a while, and now he's a scout with the Lakers. But he did this class called Scout U in August of 2017, and he kind of taught his method and how he kind of scouts, and then had us do. It was like an actual class. It was like 6 classes with homework, and he would like review our notes and stuff like that. And that's how I got into scouting. And that, I think, really was like the start of me, because like maybe 6 months later, I was like, really, I want to coach the rest of my life. I think that was really the start of me kind of on that journey. So shouts out to Alon. I actually just saw Alon today. He's the man. So that's my background. Since then, like really like, again, spring 2018 is when I would chart it. So now we're, I don't know, 4.5 years out. Like I just got super interested in player development. I realized that I didn't know anything about player development. Like I thought that I did intuitively because I played and I coached. And I was like, oh yeah, I know like how to develop skills, but kind of a few things happened during that season where I was like, I really don't know how to develop skills or how this works. And so I kind of did a deep dive into research. And that's what I've really been interested in for the last like 4 years or so. That's kind of my niche, if you will, in coaching and kind of how I process and look at the game for the last like 4 years or so.
So you're coaching right now at Swathmore?
Yeah. So after I decided that I wanted to coach the rest of my life, I was still teaching. So like I continued to teach high school English. But the following year I took kind of like off from coaching high school. I helped out a little bit, but then I was visiting a bunch of college practices in the area. And I wanted to get into college, like, and see what that more to a game. And I was like, oh, they're doing something different here. And then I was able to go to a practice and was kind of blown away. And so after that summer ended, that would have been 2019, I got back in touch with their head coach, and they didn't really have an opening. I just like kind of, I don't know, they were nice to take me. And so I've been there. This will be this right now is my 4th season, but really it's my 3rd because we didn't play during COVID. So it was like 2019, 2020. We were off 2020, 2021, and then last season was my 2nd. This was my 3rd. So yeah, I do Swathmore, and then I also, like, a big part of what I do is I run a youth, or I help to run a youth club program too, also in Philly.
How old are the kids in the club?
Like 5th through 11th grade. Yeah, I got 6th grade games tomorrow morning, man.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So like, in what capacity do you coach? Are you like mainly focused on offense? Do you do player development stuff over there as well? Like, what exactly is your role there?
At Swathmore, I mean, really, it's like I do whatever is needed, basically. Like it's kind of changed throughout the years as our staff has changed a little. But like our head coach has been there now 10 years, and he kind of like turned the program around completely. We were like a doormat, and then the year before I came, we went to the national championship game. So like a complete turnaround from like basement to ceiling or whatever. So he's been there for 10 years. Our associate head coach Shane has played for Landry, and then has been there for 4 years as an assistant. So like it's like they have everything running. Like whatever they need me to do, I do it. A lot of it is like just practice, like helping with practice, basically. And then there's some scouting duties, some self-scouting stuff as well.
So like, what do you think your like specific strengths are in regards to player development? Like, are there any specific like facets within development that you think that you could really hone in on, or like you just have like you're more like in tune with the aspect of development?
Yeah, shooting. Like shooting's like that's my thing. I was like borderline like unhealthily obsessed with shooting development like for like 2 years, the 18 months.
Okay.
There. And when I played, I was a shooter, I guess. So I think a lot of this comes back to that. But yeah, shooting. And also I just think shooting is like, I don't know, it's the most block of all the skills, you know what I mean? Like it's like there are less variables to it. I mean, I guess in many ways there are many variables to it, but there are less variables to it than like finishing, or if you just break down the skills into like shooting, finishing, you know. And so yeah, that's where I'd say most of my focus has been on, like, most of my expertise, quote unquote, is in that area.
Okay, that's interesting. Because I'm really interested in like outlier development, and like, because a lot of the times you have these prospects, right? And then they have this like considered outlier development. And my thing is like, is it really that outlier? Like, are there specific traits or indicators that you can like find over like a group of individuals that all had a similar level of outlier development and really like pinpoint those traits? And I've seen previous tweets of yours where you did that. Like, I think you and like, do you remember A Nocturnal Duck? You had a very good thread 2 years ago.
Duck.
Yeah, talking about all of this. So that's why I reached out to you, because a lot of your thoughts are very interesting. So like,
yeah, that's interesting that you went back to that thread, because like that was like, that's funny. That's like one of the, like, that's where I got a lot of these like connections from with these guys who
Really?
are great, like awesome guys who've taught me like so much about just
Yeah.
evaluations. Like Pete, like, so that's funny that one's still, it's still out there in the ether. I'm looking at it again right
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
So,
Like,
so my bad. I didn't want to cut you
no,
off.
no,
It's
you
a
got it.
full blast of the past. I was listening to something you were saying about wings, the correlation between wingspan and outlier development. Could you
Yeah.
unpack that a little bit?
Yeah.
Because it
I
sounds like
think
that's kind of what you're talking about, right?
a little bit. I think
Okay.
ever since the episode, I've like grown a little bit. I've been able to like articulate my thoughts a little better. I think it was less about outlier development and more like it's just harder to develop just the ability to shoot off the dribble when you have a smaller wingspan, which is anecdotal, but like and it's very small sample size. But specifically, like two players, um, Dennis Smith Jr. and Tyrell Terry. I think Dennis Smith Jr. is a little different, but both those players, they had very limited ability to pull up off the dribble, like within the arc. And with Tyrell Terry specifically, like he was considered to have very good touch, right? Like he was pulling up like way beyond the arc, and his floater game was obviously incredible. He was just one of those guys. He was like 90% free throw hit. I don't think anyone would disagree that he had out like elite to like 75th percentile and 90th percentile touch at the very minimum. So I was confused why the pull up shooting wasn't already manifested and how like probable it was that it would actually manifest maybe in the NBA because if he doesn't develop the pull up shooting, obviously he's not. I don't even think he would be worth picking the first round. But the bet would be that because he has such great touch, he'd be able to develop that. And ultimately, he didn't really develop that. Maybe you could pinpoint that to, the actual destination that he went to. Maybe because he was a little later round pick, so they didn't put as much of like the organizational bandwidth on the development of his pull-up shooting. But I was just trying to figure out why exactly that is. And one of the reasons I potentially found is that he was his wingspan was a lot shorter. So it kind of makes sense, right? Like if you're like shorter and you don't have a great like a plus wingspan, it's a lot harder to get those shots up regardless of how great your touch is. So and the same happened to Dennis Smith Jr. also has a pretty small wingspan relative. They're both like 6'1", 6'2". So I wanted to hear your thoughts maybe like have you seen that in practice? It's a lot harder for shorter wingspan guys, regardless of if their level of touch. Is it just harder to develop pulp shooting if you have a smaller wingspan, or is there another like intrinsic factor at play here?
It's a great question. I mean, again, all of my anything that I'll say to you tonight, it's like anecdotal.
Okay,
I
yeah,
don't
no,
have
yeah,
any like stats really to back any of this. I think it starts with like, I think shooting in a game, the first part of shooting in a game is the decision to shoot, right? And so like with a guy like you take Tyrell Terry, like is he a really good catch and shoot guy?
he was
Yeah,
theoretically,
that's what you're seeing. Yeah,
yeah,
like,
basically
or yeah.
very good.
And so like it happens at the point of the catch, or it happens at the point of the ball screen if you're like, or at the point of attack, where it's like you have to kind of change something in a way about the way the guy thinks to add that as more of an option in their game. I think that's like one of the first things. And I don't know how exactly you do that, but
Okay.
you know what I mean? Like it's
Yeah,
like if you
it's like a
because if
diagnosis almost.
yeah, like if Tyrell Terry, like at the point of the catch, right?
Hmm.
If he's thinking shot, which like of course he is, then and like a very secondary reaction would be like to get to a pull up, then you have to do something to like change that mindset a little bit. It's like I think it starts with a bit of a mindset change, and then there's also something. And again, all of this is anecdotal. It's like stuff that I've been trying. I'm so glad you asked this question.
Yeah,
It's just like stuff that I obsess about all the time. Like, well, why does this not work or whatever? There's also just something that happens in the transfer from ball to hand, right? Like on a catch and shoot, you're typically catching with two hands.
yeah,
Whereas, and so your wrist will be loaded essentially, like you want to get to there in a catch and shoot. Your
hmm,
wrist will essentially be like that. And there's something that happens when you go off the dribble where your wrist may not be completely loaded, and so like your shot changes in a way from what it would look like on a catch. And you would need to like I don't know, maybe drill that on a granular level first with a guy like Tyrell Terry, to get that transfer to happen, like the transfer from like the dribble to both hands, and for the ball to be like, or his body to be ready to move it in a way that's somewhat similar to how he moves it off the catch, to move it up his body and then through.
Okay.
But I think the wingspan thing is super interesting because I'm trying to think now of guys who were pretty good off the dribble shooters, like just like on the team right now, right? And most of them have like longer wingspans, like they're longer guys.
Yeah, I'm just looking at Trae Young's wingspan. Yeah, Trae Young's a 6'2" wingspan.
Yeah, because I've heard the opposite actually. I don't honestly, my opinion, I don't think wingspan has anything to do with it. But what's it called? I've heard that people say that long arms like make it tougher because it's like tougher to get it up there. So I've heard that theory too. I don't know, but
I've heard that. No, Mike, I've heard that too. I've mostly heard that. Like a longer wingspan, it's harder to develop shooting because the ball's like, it's harder to basically like connect the ball to your body. Right, because your arms are just like they're out here, like, and then to move the ball in a way that's just like in terms of physics is going to get it to go consistently. But no, I've actually heard the opposite, but I've only ever heard it in the context of just shooting generally, never in the specific like off the dribble shooting.
Yeah, I think this is more like a late developmental thing, right? Like these guys are all, I'm talking about like when you're in college, when you're like an 18, 19-year-old player, and you don't have that pull-up game at all, then how feasible is it to develop that pull-up game? I think that one of the detrimental factors would be the lack of wingspan. But like obviously, for example, Trae Young, he's one of the most prolific pull-up shooters like in draft history, I think. So I don't think that that's as big of a concern, but simply in terms of actually developing that skill, I do think that it kind of does make it makes a little intuitive sense that like if you're not even able to like get a pull-up shot like when you're 19 years old, just simply not even having the wingspan to do it kind of does limit the developmental probability of that occurring. But obviously,
because like you're saying, like, you need to be able to get to it. Right?
Exactly.
Like that's the key. Like you need to be able to get to it, so you have to have the tools to get to it.
Yeah.
In a way. So no, I that's really interesting. Definitely something I'm going to think about.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I just don't know if wingspan has a ton to do with it. That's what I think. Like with like Terry, I just think he may have not have like the ability to create separation as much. And with Smith, he's really quick, but I think he has like feel stuff. Like he's not great at like timing his dribbles and stuff like that. That's where he kind of. But that would be my theory on why they did him.
The other thing with Smith, and correct me if I'm wrong, like if Dennis Smith puts the ball down, like he's going to the rim, right?
Yeah.
Is that essentially accurate, right? So like,
I think so, yeah.
Or he has the ability to go to the rim, right? And so to add that third level of scoring, right? Like between, he makes the decision to go, like there's a like a feel component of like making the decision to then pull up rather than go to the rim, because he's hardwired probably to go to the rim more so than a lot of guards. I don't know. That's kind of comes back to what I was saying about like, okay, it's the decision to get to the pull up. But it's an interesting question for sure. Who are guys like? I'm thinking of Chris Paul. Like Chris Paul doesn't have a large wingspan, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And he's like one of the better. He's like one of the prolific, mid-range pull-up guys.
Yeah. Or like Tyler Hero has like a negative wingspan, unless we're just talking about like smaller guards.
But these guys were all like prolific pull-up shooters in college, right?
Yeah, you're talking about late development. I get what you mean. And shooting is a late developing skill too. Like that's like there are other things that you basically like you develop at like through your prepubescent years, but like shooting, like usually like that, you have to basically be strong enough to shoot it. So like it's like starts around 8th grade-ish when you're like, or it doesn't, right? Or your form is just the same and it's flawed. So
because like Terry is one of those guys, like I've always been confused about him because the touch is like it's pretty really generally elite, right? Like the 90% free throw percentage, like the 40% from three, the floaters, like he generally like the Steph Curry comp is crazy from like Kevin O'Connor or whatever. but like he was supposed to be a very, very good shooter, and the fact that he didn't have a pull-up game and did not develop one, maybe, I actually haven't been paying attention too much, so I don't. Maybe he did somehow develop in the G League, but that's just a very odd phenomenon. So I'm just trying to understand like why that would happen in development and how a similar player would go about developing that pull-up game.
I don't know. There's something about pull-up shooting that's like a somewhat violent. There are somewhat violent movements in a way. Like you're pounding the ball and like
Exactly,
you're stepping in. And so like for guys who are super smooth, like it sounds like Terry is like great touch, super smooth. It may be a little more, if you haven't already developed it, it may be hard to kind of like to transition that touch from which basically is a smooth process, like from catch to shoot, like it's very smooth, to this more violent, like pounding, popping the ball, and like doing whatever with your feet, you know? So I don't know. That's just one thought.
The whole what's the transition between the handle and the shot, right? Like obviously it's going to be much more difficult to make it fluid when you're off the dribble because you have to react to all your defenders around you rather than like the catch and shoot, which is like it's simply it's very slow.
There's a flow. There's a flow to there's like a flow to it, basically.
The fluidity is a lot less compromised because it's catch and shoot. But I'm trying to figure out like what is the potential in developing that, because then you have a guy like Paul George, right? And he wasn't a great off dribble shooter at all, but he similarly had very good touch. He was like 90% free throw percentage as well. So I'm trying to understand why would Paul George have that like the ability to develop that to such a greater extent than Terry. And maybe it's definitely something about the height, maybe like Paul George is 6'8", and that guy is like 6'1". So is it just easier to react to the like if you're talking about pulp shooting as a function of like decision making, I don't think they're that different realms of decision making. So maybe they are, but assuming they're not, what other factors would cause that beyond height, or maybe it's simply just height? I don't know.
I mean, the height is like definitely a huge factor, right? Like it's like it's like because when you get like when you're on the perimeter, you're not. There just aren't as many limbs in your general vicinity to kind of like get around or whatever to be able to see the rim. And when you get into that, 20 to 15 foot area, it just gets harder. Like it's for sure. And so the shorter you are, the harder it is.
Yeah, it's kind of weird corollary, but I was talking with Coach AJ Jones last week, and I was mentioning like a phenomenon I found, and it matched exactly what he's found anecdotally. But like a lot of the players are considered to have like outlier handle development, like Paul George, Jaylen Brown, Jimmy Butler, not Pascal, but like these guys, they tend to have very small hands. And what he said, he just completely independently, he mentioned how like in his practice he's seen that like that fluid gather from the dribble to shot is a lot easier when you have smaller hands, because when you have like bigger hands it kind of protrudes and like, prevents you from like the efficient energy transfer. So that kind of had like an anecdotal basis to like what I found statistically. But I was wondering if you have any thoughts on that, if you've ever noticed similar phenomenon.
Totally, yeah. Like I think that's really interesting because like the larger hands thing is definitely something that I've thought about and looked at with shooting, and like let's just say Giannis. Like Giannis is the most obvious guy, right? He like with the ball looks small in his hands, and so like a lot of the traditional kind of shooting precepts like probably don't apply to him just because like his hands are huge.
Exactly.
it's like maybe he should be fading away. You know what I mean? Because that is a more efficient energy transfer. Like, but that's super interesting. Who were the other guys who had outlier handle development? It was Paul George.
There's Paul George, Jaylen Brown. There was a lot. We had a whole list. I forgot. I know Bradley Beal was down. Like he had a pretty low hand size. I can't remember off the top of my head, but Paul George and Jaylen Brown are the pretty big.
Right, Paul George they're the famous. They're like the famous example.
They're like the big handle that guys.
Yeah, that's super interesting.
I was looking, and George almost instantly shot like from long twos, so those are mostly pull-ups, about the same as he shot like in his prime in the NBA. So it's interesting because in college, Av was right that he didn't shoot well from like long two and like pull-ups. So like, but as soon as he walked into the NBA, he seemingly like picked it up. Like in his first 2 years, 20, 21 years old,
Yeah,
he
exactly.
was already like 38, 39%, which is pretty much his percentage in his prime in those shots. So yeah, I don't know. That's interesting. Like I guess I would say probably like the ability to just get it over guys is probably a big part
Yeah.
of it. But then yeah, there's certainly some like kind of unknown intangible factors there probably too.
Well, and like there's a little more space in the NBA just with the arc. Like there,
Mhm.
like obviously he's tall, but like with the arc, you're shooting. I don't know, like mid range shots in college just don't really happen because everyone's packed. Like it's packed in the
Yeah.
NBA. Or it tends to be more packed in the NBA. It's more spread and there's more room. But I also think Mike, like, and of course we don't know what goes on behind like closed doors, but if his college coaches told him that's not a good shot, or whatever, or like we don't really want those shots. And his NBA coaches were like, okay, cool. Like, or with the shot clock, it's 24 seconds, so you're getting to a lot of those shots more frequently. Especially if you're high usage, like then more are gonna go in. Like, you know what I mean? So, and that's that, like you said, like that's like kind of the unknown intangible things. Like we can't know
Right.
what the
Yeah, maybe
the
Terry
directive
like doesn't.
was.
Maybe Terry's not like practicing, or and then George is like sitting out there 24 hours doing practice and
That's
stuff.
another thing too. Yeah.
Yeah, like yeah, we know.
I
Yeah,
mean, I
but
think a big part about like PG's development as like a shot creator was like the handle, right? Like that handle improved massively for Fresno to like whatever Pacers. So like I think like the drastic changes in the handle really aided that development, getting to the pull up and just becoming a better pull up shooter. Because if he already had the touch and the handle allows you to get to your spots and make those and take those pull ups, I think that would probably be like the main driving force towards that. So perhaps a better way of approaching the situation is maybe like how would it was Terry had an equal likelihood of attaining that handle development. Maybe like his handle wasn't there, and because of the lack of the handle, he couldn't like lead to make those decisions. He couldn't get to the spots. But what are your
Yeah.
thoughts on that?
No, I mean, I think that's like when I'm talking about hands, like we're talking about handle, right? Like it's like if
Yeah.
you have the ball more securely in your hand, in whatever hand it is, your right or your left, when you are bringing it to your shooting hand, if you have it more securely in there, and like you said, you're in your spot, you've created some separation, then it logically follows that like the transfer will be smoother and
Yeah.
you'll be shooting a higher percentage. I don't know.
How
I'm fascinated to look at some Terry. I want to look at Terry after
no,
this,
it's just
just like some
yeah.
singing clips from college, just to see.
Wait, Mike, what was like the issues with Terry? Like, why wasn't he can? Why do you think, like, from your diagnosis, he wasn't able to get to those pull-ups, or why was he shooting?
right now I think he probably didn't have like the best handle, but that could be wrong. This is just like a vague memory I have. It could be wrong, but I think his handle wasn't like amazing for a guard. But yeah, we could if you guys want to. Let's. You want me to share and check out his? I have a G League game of his from last year. All right, come on,
Okay.
Terry. Oh, it's pretty good pass. He's a pretty good passer. Well, at least they're running plays for him. That's good.
Oh, you could pass out of that. Interesting.
He's more of a combo, right? Like, he's a two, but like he doesn't really have the size to play the two. Like, what's his position?
I would say he's a really good passer, but like, I
Yeah,
think his handle isn't that great. That's what I'm trying. I think
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
remember, but
Well, it looks like they're
I don't.
playing him off the ball, but their actions are designed to get him the ball.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of teams just like let whoever get it up the floor nowadays.
Yeah.
Oh, he has the floater.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, like
Any
that.
comments?
Pure. Yeah, that's pure.
Yeah, like that shot looked pretty good, but yeah,
Yeah,
up to Trimble.
what I'm seeing is like when he gets in there, it's just a lot of big bodies in his way. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And he's in attack mode as he should be off the ball screen. But when he gets
Yeah,
in,
but
it's like there's just not really an opportunity for him to pull.
yeah, he's not very strong. Yeah, that's what I think.
Yeah,
It's like he's not great at creating separation to get those shots out.
yeah,
And his pull up is a little bit, from what I remember, it's like a little bit kind of weird. But maybe he got it better. I haven't seen this game or anything. Um, I haven't really seen much of him since college, so Maybe it looks better now, but in college, I remember he had some kind of like awkward looking ones, like you guys talked about going from dribble into shot was kind of weird. Is that TJ? Is that big for you, like shot mechanics, or because you were talking about like the mental aspect of it? Or like, what do you think like separates you, kind of like makes you different than other people that do a lot of shot development and stuff like that?
So yeah, I mean, part of it, like, I don't know. I've changed, like I said, it's like with anything that you're kind of like really into. Like my philosophies have probably changed a little bit throughout the years that I've been doing it, and like been a practitioner of it, right? So like working one on one with shooting. But I mean, mechanics are kind of a bigger thing for me now than maybe they used to be. But the way, so the guys who I follow with shooting are Rob Fodor, who's the he's the heat shooting coach. He's called the shooting guy. And his like protege is a guy named Mike Dunn who lives in the area. Oh, there he is for three. And so what I like the shooting philosophy that I follow is theirs, and it basically breaks down the shooting fundamentals into different categories than what most people usually talk about. And it's posture, connection, and sequence are the three things that they look for, or the three things that they teach, and then there are like a lot of things within that. But it's a little bit different than I think like how the game has traditionally been taught, or how that skill's traditionally been taught. And so I've been following them, and I've been like lucky because Mike is in the area to like have actually worked out with him and seen him do workouts and stuff. So I just steal a bunch of their stuff basically. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but I don't focus as much on like the quote unquote like traditional mechanics, like elbow, like talking about elbows and wrists and stuff like that. Like I do sometimes talk about that stuff, but it's all about basically connecting the ball, moving it up your body in a fluid motion, and then out towards out and up towards the hoop. It's kind of a simplified it's a simplified version of traditional shooting mechanics probably. Anyway, I guess I'm rambling here, but that's I guess my answer to that.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Like I recently did some research on shooting development. I found well, at least my perception, what you just explained, is like a guy like Trey Mann or Bones Highland or like Steph. Obviously, is like the most obvious one. Like those are the type of guys that seems like in that type of philosophy will be kind of like the more ideal, right? Or am I
Yeah,
not?
yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Kind of like the single motion, like or like
single
Trey,
motion, yeah,
yeah, like going from the dribble into like almost no elbow. Well, I guess you said you don't care about the elbow, but like you know what I mean, like like the initial like fluid kind of movement from gathered into shot.
Yeah, well, everybody's body is different, right? So like where your elbow is in relation to like where the ball is always going to be different. Like we just talked about hand size, right? Like it's always going to be different. But what we're trying to do when we shoot the ball is to move it from position one, which is like wherever you catch it, or if you imagine a free throw, it's like where you start. Move it from position one to position two, which is hand underneath the ball, like perfectly underneath the ball. So we go like that, and then through. And so I guess like the goal of my shooting instruction is to get you from one to two and through in a fluid motion. And there are different ways for each guy to do that. Like everything is differentiated instruction in many ways. So I don't know. It's not a great answer, but I haven't gotten to the level of expertise where I can really explain what I do. But Mike, you're right. Like that's I mean, Steph's obviously Steph, right? But
yeah,
it's just it's less trying to make people shoot like Klay Thompson, which like of course Klay's shot is incredible, right?
Exactly, yeah.
But like they're it's great that him and Steph are on the same team because they're like the two different styles, right? Steph is like
right, exactly.
Is like what's the word? Like adaptability. Like he's all adaptability, right? Whereas Klay is machine, And so
that's a great way to put it.
Yeah, it's a little more on the Steph side, like trying to get people to shoot on the Steph side.
Right.
Which like
yeah,
no, and again, that's of course nothing at all. Again, like Klay's shot is incredible. Like I study that as well to try to see like how do you get to be that machine. But he's like, if you created a robot, that's how the robot would shoot. So
Yeah, Kawhi is like the most perfect, probably like at least
yeah,
in the like textbook sense, like mechanics.
yes.
Yeah, yeah.
I think I subbed him out. It looked like he had like Tyrell had a little longer shot. Like it looked like 1.5, almost two motion.
Hmm.
Did you see that, or am I tripping?
I didn't. I only saw the first shot that he hit, which looked pretty flowish, like fluid and flowish. That's another
Yeah.
thing. Was like, I mean, I feel like if you have a two motion shot to begin with, you might be a better pull up shooter because that's going to necessarily be a little bit more two motion when you get to the top of your release. I don't know.
Wait,
Oh,
sorry. I
interesting.
say that again. I missed it.
So like when you get to the so like you're dribbling, right? And then when you get to the top of your release, there could be a little more of a pause because your body is probably moving differently than when you're catch and shooting. So you may have to like kind of pause a little more at the top. So if you're already a two motion shooter, maybe then you have a better opportunity to develop into like a off the dribble shooting game. I'm just saying these thoughts as they're coming to me. This is actually not something I really thought about.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's interesting. Yeah, I haven't thought about that much. That could be true though, because there's not a lot of. It seems like most like single motion guys already kind of have a dribble game relatively early on. We like when I started working in the like at the high school level, and or if they don't, I don't know. I can't think of too many that didn't. And how did they develop? Like how many guys are like that out there? I'm not sure. Like Jaren Jackson, maybe I'm coming up with.
What do you mean? Like he didn't develop in regards to what?
Did he develop a off dribble game? But then he's like a big, so it's kind of weird. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, bigs are different, man.
Yeah, it's kind of
Yeah,
like
yeah.
different. Yeah, so that's why I'm like I'm trying to think how many like guys that had like single motion kind of mechanics and then kind of didn't have a dribble game, I guess, in the like the college level. I guess like Terry is probably the closest example, but there's probably more. I just suck at thinking
Wings
of
wise,
like
there's
this.
definitely a lot. Like Mikhail, or you said you want
Oh
single
yeah,
motion,
yeah. Well, I guess Miguel's sort of is like in
maybe
between. I
like
guess
Devin Vassell, even Mathurin to an extent.
I'd say Visal is more like
Like for example, I'm thinking about a guy like Malachi Branham this last draft cycle. He's an elite pull-up shooter, elite mid-range game. So how like translatable is it that intuitively it would feel like if you're good at shooting mid-rangers, you'd be good at shooting threes and vice versa. But then obviously there's a lot more nuance to that. So what's your take on that, like comparison?
that is interesting.
I mean,
I don't think that
like
works in practice.
yeah, like you said, intuitively it does. It seems to follow that you would be good at shooting.
Yeah,
Do you mean like off the dribble threes or catch and shoot threes or both?
I mean both. Yeah.
Both. Yeah, it does seem to follow. I have found though that like I feel like there are guys who are good mid like off the dribble mid range guys who or maybe even off the dribble three guys who sometimes do have trouble with developing catch and shoot three. Like or it's not like they're like bad at it, but they're just not as good at it as they are at the other things, which is usually like that's actually how I was as a player. Like I'm better off the dribble than I am off the catch, which is the opposite of what most people think it is. I think right. Like
Mhm.
most people are like, oh, you're going to be better off the catch than you're off the dribble. A lot of that has to do with, from what I found, is like how you've developed your shot. And by developed, I mean like how you practice your shot. Like most of the time when I was practicing, when I was younger, like I was alone, and so of course you're going to be like dribbling and shooting, um,
Yeah.
and uh, and other like kids that I've coached who are better off the dribble, like kind of follow that same thing. Like they're like they're just like at the park, maybe by themselves playing. And so you're going to be shooting off the dribble more. And then you develop those mechanics that are off the dribble mechanics. And then maybe that doesn't translate as well to catching, or that you have to kind of change something a little bit when you catch it and shoot it.
Are you really better off the dribble though? Like if you took 100 threes off the dribble and spot up, you'd be better off the dribble?
I think I would be. Yeah, it's specific. It's specific to me, of course, but like I'm better, especially with my off my left hand, and that's with a lot of righties. They're better off their left because what you need to do off the dribble. That is like what you need to do is you need to basically like load your wrist, your right hand, your shooting hand as you are getting to your pickup. And so that's easier to do off your left hand dribble because your wrist is already kind of stabilized as you bring it to the ball.
Yeah.
Whereas off the right, like you're dribbling with your wrist, and then you're snapping it back as you load it. So I'm better if I took 100 threes like off the catch versus off the dribble. Yeah, I think I'd probably make more off the dribble, honestly. But I'm a little don't take me. I like played Division III basketball and wasn't any good, so don't take me as like a.
I'm even worse than that. I'm also like better off the dribble than like I guess like compared to the average person of my skill. I'm better off the dribble, but worse off the catch. But I still feel like my spot up, like if I shot 100 of each, my spot up would be higher. I feel like that's like in most cases, even people that are really high level off the dribble and like lower spot up, I still feel like the spot up kind of edges out. You know what I mean? Like
I think so too. But if you shot, so let's change the question slightly though. Like if you shot 100, if you took 100 off the dribble threes in a game versus 100 off the catch threes in a game, which one do you think you would have made more of?
If I took 100 catch or dribble in the game.
In a game, just thinking like, let's say you played a whole season, right? And we're talking about in a game rather than just isolated practice. Do you think you would have made more off the dribble or off the catch?
I think. Well, it also depends like on spots. Like I suck from the corners, but I'm really good above the break. So like but like if they're from the same spot, I still think I'd make a little bit more spot ups, but not a lot more. Not as much as like the average person. Yeah, I don't know, but maybe my theory is maybe there is like a lot of people that are better, like legitimately better off the dribble. Like Killian Hayes comes to mind.